we're recording this program, um, and delighted today to be able to welcome Liz Zunon to do this program. In a moment, Bonnie Rothenberg will introduce Liz. So what I am going to do is to tell you about the funding behind this program and all of our art projects this year. So I'm Julie Cabot. I'm a trustee at the library and the chair of the program committee, the Arts and Culture Program Committee. So we're very grateful for the funding that we've gotten for this event and the other events in this series. This project is made possible with funds from the Decentralization Program, a re-grant program of the New York State Council on the Arts, with the support of the governor and the New York State Legislature, and administered in Columbia County by the Greene County Council on the Arts, doing business as CREATE, Council for Resources to Enrich the Arts, Technology, and Education. That's a mouthful, but we're very grateful for the funding. And now Bonnie is a member of our Arts and Culture Committee. And so Bonnie, you get the lovely job of introducing Liz.
Okay, thank you. Just wanted to welcome everybody who's here or who's coming. And I'm Bonnie Rothenberg. Each year, our series of programs has a theme, something we choose that seems relevant to the times we're living in. The theme this year offers respite for the weary in programming devoted to travel. Travel a melody, travel a line, travel a story, travel in time. And I guess you could say travel in your imagination. Elizabeth Zunon is an acclaimed artist who has illustrated numerous children's books. Grandpa Cacao, her latest book, was both written and illustrated by her. She takes us on travels to Ivory Coast, Africa, where she grew up. She visits her past by creating a beautiful, poignant story where she connects with the revered grandfather she never met. I read her book several times, and it always felt like a soothing, warm balm spread over me. My grandparents, my children, and my grandchildren. The cycle of life we all share. Thank you, Liz. We can't forget the chocolate. We travel with Liz to the cacao plantation that was her grandfather's pride and joy. Through the artistic techniques she excels at, we are there learning the hard work it takes to produce delicious chocolate. So I'm very honored to present Elizabeth Zunon.
Thank you so much, Bonnie. That was a wonderful and very kind introduction. I'm so happy to be here with you today, sharing a little bit about my grandfather's story, a little bit about our family tradition. So as you heard, I grew up in the Ivory Coast, West Africa. I was born here in Albany, where I live now. And I've been back in the Albany area or back in the United States since I was just about to turn 13. So I've been back for almost, it's been 24 years since we've been back in the United States. And I always loved making artwork as a kid. And as I grew up, I thought, I want to see if I can find a job where I can do painting and drawing, because those are my favorite things. So I am going to go ahead and share my screen and talk a little bit about the inspiration and the process behind this particular book, Grandpa Cacao, A Tale of Chocolate from Farm to Family. Let's see if Bonnie, could you give me a thumbs up if you're able to see my screen? Thumbs up. Okay. All right. Perfect. So this is the first book that I ever wrote and illustrated. I've illustrated a lot of books that were written by other authors, but I decided I want to write my own story and illustrate it. I want to make it about my life, my family. I love learning about how things are made. I also love baking. So I thought I can write about how chocolate is made because a lot of people, most people that I know love chocolate. And I can also show in my story how you can make a chocolate cake because a lot of people have experiences baking in the kitchen, making brownies, making cookies. So I thought if I write a story about something that everybody knows how to do, I think it'll be really interesting. So my first authored illustrated book, Grandpa Cacao, tells the story of my grandfather in the Ivory Coast, West Africa. Now, this book is inspired by my father's stories, my family. Here you can see me and my dad in the kitchen. I was in high school here, and we are cooking one of my favorite dishes. It's called aloko. It is fried plantain bananas sprinkled with just a little bit of salt. It's so, so delicious. Here is a black and white picture of my dad on the right and his cousin. And then on the bottom, you can see a picture of me and my family. This is me. This is my little brother, Denny. This is my mom, Ellen. And this is my dad, Dennis. So this was taken a long time ago in the 1990s when we lived in Africa, in the Ivory Coast. So the book that I wrote is about life on a cacao plantation and our family's love of chocolate. In the book, a little girl and her dad bake a chocolate cake while she learns about her grandfather, a cacao plantation owner, harvesting and preparing the cacao fruits, which will be used to make chocolate. I knew that I wanted to use oil paint, collage, which is cutting up pieces of paper into different shapes and gluing them down on your background, and also silk screening. I wanted to use a lot of different types of art making to make my story because I thought if I can use a lot of different colors and a lot of different patterns and a lot of different textures, I think it'll be really interesting to look at. And I think it'll make a very visually compelling story. So my creative process of making this book is kind of like weaving different worlds together into one story. The world of Africa, the world of the cacao plantation owner, the world of how you bake a chocolate cake. Now, how can I write a story? First, I write what I know. I also research what I don't know. I talk to people and I have different learning experiences. I talked to my dad a lot when I was trying to write this book, and the different learning experiences that I had, I spent a lot of time in my kitchen trying to make the perfect chocolate cake. And when I'm writing my story, I want it to sound interesting. I want whoever's reading the book to want to keep turning the page and learning more about the story. So when I write with action words. For example, he sliced through the skins. I sprinkle in the salt. They scooped out the beans. And then, you know what? Since I was writing a book about chocolate and where chocolate comes from and how you can cook with chocolate and how chocolate is so special to me and my family, I also ate a lot of chocolate when I was working on it because I wanted to try to describe in words what it feels like when you put a delicious piece of chocolate on your tongue and you taste it. After I wrote the story, I tried to make all my sentences sound very interesting. And after I wrote all my interesting sentences, I also made one drawing for every page of the book. And then it was time for paint and color. Painting is my favorite thing to do. So every illustration, every picture in this book comes from real life. Usually when I paint my characters, I want them to look pretty realistic. I don't really want them to look like stick figures. I don't really want them to look like cartoons. I want them to look almost like real people that could walk right off of the pages of the book. So if I want to paint realistic people, I have to look at real people and try to copy what I see, draw and paint what's in front of me. So these are some of the pictures that I looked at when I was trying to draw and paint the characters in my book, which are basically my own family members. Here you can see a photo of my dad's face in profile. Here you can see a picture of me with my little brother, and then my dad and my mom, and then my mom with my little brother on her lap. So here you can see one of the drawings that I made when I was looking at this picture of my dad. I also thought about who are the farmers that actually grow the trees that produce the fruit that make chocolate. And these are some of the 2 workers that worked on my family's farm in the town of Daloa in the Ivory Coast, West Africa. Now, if you look very closely, they're standing next to this tree, which has kind of a gray and white trunk. And right on the side of the trunk, you can see a little orange, kind of football shaped fruit. And that is a real cacao fruit. So this fruit will be picked off of the tree by these farmers. They will cut the fruit open. They will scoop out the beans that are inside. And they will make the beans ferment underground. And then they will dry the beans under the sun. And that is the fruit that will become chocolate. So I'm thinking about the farmers. I'm also thinking about what is the best way that I can paint a realistic picture of people in my book. So I took a lot of pictures. I take pictures of the things around me, like a beautiful puffy clouds in the sky. I love taking pictures of trees. Sometimes I cut and paste pictures of trees in my artwork. And I also take pictures of myself because what I like to do is kind of pretend like I'm in a play. And I act out every scene from the book. And I take pictures of myself pretending to be the characters on the book pages, so that when I draw the characters, they look realistic because I'm looking at what color their skin is. I'm looking at where the highlights are on the skin and where the shadows fall on the skin so that I could paint realistically in my book. So here's a picture of me pretending to be my dad, holding a bar of chocolate and reaching across the table. Here you can see the painting that I started to create, adding my dad's features. I'm adding his brown skin. I'm adding the highlights on his forehead, his cheek, his chin, and the front of his neck. And then here you can see how I continued to paint my dad's face. I added his hair, I added his eyebrows, painted in some more of his skin tone, and I started painting the wall behind him in a very light blue paint color. And then here you can see this is how the page looks in the book. We've got my dad, he's fully painted, he's got a wall behind him, he's got a little photograph on the wall, he's wearing a blue sweater and an apron that has all these tiny little squares of fabric. Now, if you look closely, the photograph that's hanging behind my dad's face on the wall is actually a copy of one of my favorite postcards. This is a postcard of the city skyline of the city that we lived in called Abidjan in the Ivory Coast. So I tried to look at what are the shapes of the tall buildings downtown in the postcard, and I tried to paint them with my tiny little paintbrush here in the photograph in the book. Now, this is the other side of the same illustration. We see a little girl, which is me, reaching across the table, reaching for that bar of chocolate that she's going to unwrap, break into pieces, and put into her chocolate cake. So here's me as a grown-up, pretending that I'm a little 7-year-old girl about to bake my own chocolate cake with my dad. And I'm reaching, using my imagination, that I'm reaching across the table and I'm going to grab that bar of chocolate. And then here you can see how the final illustration looks in the book. I've painted my skin brown. I've painted my brown hair. I gave myself my pink headband, yellow shirt, and I'm also wearing an apron made up of little strips of squares of fabric. Now, every illustration comes from real life, as I said. So since I'm painting a picture of me and my dad in the dining room making our chocolate cake, I actually looked at a picture of my mom and dad's actual dining room. They live in Guilderland. And I looked at their wooden table, their wooden chairs, the pictures that they have on the wall, and their lace curtains, so that I could draw and then paint and then collage a very similar scene in my own book. Now, all of the little squares that make up my dad's apron and my apron, each of those little fabrics comes from either a piece of clothing or an accessory or a painting that I have in my house. So this striped piece of fabric comes from my 5th grade pencil case. This is where I used to keep all my pens and pencils when I was in 5th grade. And the little square fabric that has the green and brown bird on it comes from a painting that I did when I was at Guilderland High School. And then this strip of fabric that has polka dots of yellow and white on a blue background come from one of my favorite pairs of pants. So I'm using the things from my real life to help make the story about my life come alive off the page. And since this is a book about making a chocolate cake, I took a lot of pictures of the different ingredients and the different kitchen accessories that you need to make a chocolate cake. I took a picture of my hand holding a bowl. I took a picture of my hand holding 3 eggs, because in my cake recipe, you need 3 eggs. And then I took a lot of pictures of all of the chocolate cakes that I baked in my kitchen. I love drawing and painting hands and feet, fingers and toes. So here is my hand pretending to reach for one of those 3 eggs to crack open and pour into my chocolate cake mix. And then here you can see the painting that I did of a hand reaching for one of these 3 eggs for the chocolate cake recipe. So I'm always painting, and then when my paint is dry, then I'll take a piece of paper, cut out a shape of an egg or a spatula or a bowl, and I will glue it onto my painting. Also, chocolate, of course. I'm making a book about chocolate. I'm writing about chocolate. I'm drawing about chocolate. I got to keep eating chocolate to stay inspired, right? And it's pretty much my favorite food, as you can tell here. Here I am pretending to be that little girl unwrapping that bar of chocolate and trying to smell the beautiful aroma of the dark chocolate that she's going to bake with. Here you can see I've started painting the illustration of the little girl's face. I painted her hair, her eyes, her nose, her lips, her arms, her hands, her fingers. And then when my paint was dry, I found some dark brown paper and I cut it out into the shape of the chocolate bar and I glued it onto my painting. I found some gold paper. I cut it out into the shape of the chocolate bar wrapper and I glued that onto my painting. And then I found some yellow paper for the shirt, some pink paper for the headband. And in the background, I painted a scene with elephants and a beautiful African sunrise, because she's using her imagination as she's smelling the chocolate. The smell of the chocolate is kind of inspiring her to close her eyes and think about where the chocolate comes from. And in this case, the chocolate she's baking with comes from Africa. Here you can see my desk in my studio as I'm working on that painting. So I love to paint the people's faces first. So here's my face, here's my dad's face. And then I painted my arms and my hands. And then I started painting my beautiful African sunset behind there with some purple paint, some pink, orange, and yellow paint. And on the right here, you can see my palette where I'm mixing my colors for the sunrise. And here you can see some of the paint brushes that I'm using to paint my sunrise on the paper. Here is another in-process image of that same illustration. We've got the green grass, we've got some elephants roaming around, because in the Ivory Coast, there used to be a lot of elephants. And then we can also see some of the pieces of paper and some of the scissors that I'm using to cut out the shapes of these squares in the aprons that the girl and her dad are wearing. Now, when I illustrate a book, there's usually about, give or take, 16 illustrations or 16 paintings that I have to make. Now, it takes a long time to make 16 paintings. Usually it takes me months and months and months, but I also like to work on 4 paintings all at the same time. So here on my desk, you can see 1, 2, 3, 4 paintings from the book that I'm working on all together because I'm painting all the sky with the same paintbrush and the same blue paint. I'm painting all the green grass with the same colors, the same paintbrushes, the same green paint. At the end of the book, the doorbell rings and there's a very special guest who arrives with a very special present. Well, I thought about the living room in my mom and dad's house, and I thought I want to draw my mom and dad's living room in my book. So my mom and dad's living room has light blue walls. They have a wooden door, a wooden front door, and they have a couple of art pieces hanging on the wall. So before I painted this painting, I looked at a picture of my mom and dad's living room. You can see the blue walls. You can see the wooden front door. You can see a photograph here, and you can see a painting here. So I copied what my parents' living room looked like so that I could paint it in the book. Now on the wall, my parents have a very nice photo of them the day that they got married. And then here you can see a picture of me. I'm pretending that I'm a 7-year-old girl running to the front door because somebody just rang the doorbell and I'm expecting a very special guest. Here in this picture, you can see me and my little brother. I mean, he used to be very little, but now he's a lot taller than I am. But he is helping me pose in the picture. He is pretending to be our grandpa because we heard that our grandpa is very, very tall, just like my brother. So I asked my brother to do a little bit of acting and pretend that he was grandpa and stand outside the door waiting to come inside the house and have some chocolate cake. Now, making Grandpa Cacao come to life, even though he's a real person, I never actually got to meet him in my real life. That's why I wanted to make a book about him. And I've never even seen a picture of him. So I had to look at pictures of my face, pictures of my dad's face and my brother's face to try to figure out what Grandpa might have looked like. I thought about it and I thought, I think I'm going to give him a very nice smile. I think I'm going to give him some dimples because my dad has dimples. And I thought, I bet Grandpa had dimples too. So I started painting my grandpa with one of my skinny paintbrushes with dark brown paint. I painted the outline, and then I started painting his brown skin because my dad told me that my grandpa had brown skin just like mine. And then I started painting the highlights on his skin, on his forehead, his nose, his cheeks, on his chin. And then I painted the shadows on his face, his hair, his eyebrows, his teeth because he's smiling a little bit, and his hands because he is giving a very special gift. Now, since I've never seen a picture of my grandpa and I've never met him, I had to figure out what kind of clothing is Grandpa going to wear in the book. What is he going to be dressed like? Is he going to be wearing jeans and a t-shirt? Is he going to be wearing a sweater? I don't know. But after I thought about it for a while, I thought a lot of grandpas in the Ivory Coast where I grew up, this is how they dress. They often wear long pants and a shirt. And if they live in a small village and not a big city, they usually have a very big piece of fabric that they wrap around their bodies and then they throw it over their shoulder, kind of like a scarf or a shawl. You can see a little bit better. This guy, he's not wearing a shirt, but he has a beautiful piece of African fabric. It kind of looks like a quilt, a woven quilt with different squares. He wrapped it around his body, wrapped it around his chest, and then he threw the extra fabric over his shoulder. So I thought, I'm going to give my grandpa the same kind of outfit. So in my closet, I found an old plastic bin, storage bin, with a bunch of fabric of clothing and pieces of tablecloth and curtains that we used to have in the Ivory Coast. And I found this piece of fabric that used to be a tablecloth that I totally forgot about it. But I love the colors in it. It has blue, black, orange, green, and red. I thought, I'm going to give my grandpa in this book this piece of fabric. He's going to wear this as his shawl. So I traced the shapes of his shawl fabric onto my painting. I cut out the pieces of paper of that beautiful tablecloth fabric that I found in my plastic bin, and I glued it onto my painting. So after painting each illustration in this book, I decided I want to add silk screens. And silk screens are basically like stencils. So to make my special stencils, I use these screens made of silk. That's why the word silk screen, where the word silk screen comes from. And I paint the negative areas of my screen with a liquid called screen filler. So here you can see a close-up. I'm painting my stencils or my screens with my dark red liquid screen filler. So you can see I've started to paint Grandpa. He's got a big basket on his shoulders and he's walking to his cacao farm. You can see him in full body here with his machete, ready to work, walking to his cacao farm. And here you can see how the illustration looks in the book. He's kind of looks like, not kind of like a ghost maybe, because he's silkscreen or he's stenciled in white. And I decided to make all the people in Africa have this kind of appearance of people that aren't quite real. They're kind of ghostly figures. They're in the little girl's imagination. The little girl in the story has never met these people, so she doesn't quite know what they look like, but she can imagine them in her mind doing all these different important jobs on the cacao farm. So here you can see in my studio, this is where I'm sitting right now talking to you. I'm sitting right in front of this window. You can see some of my illustrations that I have taped onto my desk as I'm working on them. And you can see some of my paintbrushes and my paint and my screen filler and my silk screen ink. Here are one of the paintings from the book where the little girl and her dad are mixing the ingredients together to make their chocolate cake. And then behind them, you can see a scene of what happens on the cacao farm after the beans are taken out of the cacao fruits and after they ferment underground. They are laid under the sun on a big cement floor to dry. And then they put them in these big bags. And then here you can kind of see a big bag that this guy is filling with a little shovel. And he's going to send all these bags of chocolate beans to the chocolate factory. Now, once again, I'm working on a book about chocolate. I've got to do my chocolate cake research and development. We start by mixing the chocolate and the melted butter together in a bowl so that it's nice and silky smooth. And then we add brown sugar and white sugar, and then we mix it together with eggs and flour and baking powder. Now, every step that I took to make my chocolate cake in my kitchen, I took a picture of what that step looked like. So here is the step of pouring the chocolate cake batter from the bowl into the pan that I'm going to put into the oven. Here's the step of what the cake looks like as it's rising and baking in the oven. Here's a picture of my face pretending to look at this beautiful chocolate cake rising and baking in the oven. And after I took all these pictures, I copied what these pictures looked like so that I could paint them in the book. We can see my arm scraping with my pink spatula that chocolate cake batter from the bowl into the baking dish. You can see the baking pan in the oven with the swirls of wonderful hot chocolate cake smell rising out of the oven. And here you can see how I made that picture. First, I painted myself as a little girl, and then I painted the inside of the oven on the bottom, and then I use pieces of black construction paper and silvery gray construction paper to cut out the shapes for the inside of the oven and the inside of the window to the oven. Also, taste tests. I baked a lot of different chocolate cakes, way more than 3. You only see 3 on this picture, but in this one, I put way too much baking powder. All I could taste was baking powder. In this one, I think I probably put not enough sugar. It didn't really taste sweet like I wanted a chocolate cake to taste. And this one, the last one, was a success. I had the correct amount of chocolate, of butter, of flour, brown sugar, white sugar, all of my ingredients to make my chocolate cake look and taste deliciously scrumptious. Now, what makes a chocolate cake perfect for me is adding some chocolate frosting on top. So here you can see I've added my chocolate frosting on top of my chocolate cake, and I take a big slice out of it. I wish I had some chocolate cake right now. So this is our chocolate family story. This is my living room floor. And here you can see every single page of the book printed, laid out on the floor so you can see the entire story at one glance. So the book was published in May 2019. And it is a story about how much I love chocolate, but also it's a story about how much I love cacao. Cacao is this fruit here, this orange fruit, and that is the fruit that gives us chocolate. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I would be happy to answer any pictures, any questions anybody has about chocolate, about books, about writing, illustrating, about your favorite chocolate treat.
Liz, that was just wonderful.
Thank you.
That was just beautifully done. I can't wait to share it with my grandchildren, one of whom really, well, a couple of whom really, really love to draw and to paint and to do collage and to make art and really love chocolate.
Awesome.
Yeah, yeah. So that's just great. And I used to, as a teaching artist, teach children, facilitate children writing.
Mm-hmm.
And you do a brilliant job of talking about the action words, the questions that you asked,
Thank you.
the kind of research that you did, all those things that prepare a child to, to write, thinking about each sentence
Mm-hmm.
and, making it something that you can see in your imagination and that you can feel and that you can, uh, that brings it to life. All of that is just beautiful. And I'm salivating. I'm wanting chocolate.
I know. I wish I could give you chocolate through this computer screen.
Do I see someone eating chocolate right now?
I think he's eating an apple. Looks like an apple.
Yeah, yeah.
It is
Bonnie, you need
lovely.
to unmute. Bonnie, can you unmute?
Okay. I I see my grandson munching on an apple and enjoying it, but do you like chocolate, Simon? He's been a big chocolate lover. I mean, yeah. But we're gonna have to make a chocolate cake together. Try to follow Liz's recipe.
Yeah. Let me
Um,
know how it
That's a
goes.
great idea.
and
And
you
Harper,
know, the I have to say that the way you explained the collage aspect and then the silk screening and how you portrayed the people in Africa, that was just so interesting to me and so effective. Like, you know, ghosts, yes, imaginary, your imagination, It was wonderful. Thank you so much. I learned a lot. Did you, Simon? You learn a lot? Yeah.
And
Yeah.
Harper, do you like chocolate too?
Where is Harper?
Oh, maybe she left.
Well,
Did you like it? Why do you want me to leave?
Hannah,
Mm-hmm.
did you listen?
I did for about half of it, and then Che called me out there, so I was out there. Simon watched the whole thing.
I know. I saw him. Liz, how was it difficult to go from being an illustrator to an author illustrator? I mean, it was a story that it seems you really wanted to tell, but you know, you did the whole thing.
Yeah, it was difficult in that I had never written anything to be published before. So initially when I wrote the story, I was a student in college, and it was a very different story, with a lot more characters, and it was kind of more like 3 different vignettes, 3 different small stories, about the different processes that make chocolate. But once I decided, after illustrating many other authors' books, once I decided that I really wanted to focus on trying to make my chocolate story into a book, I took a lot of time working with my agent and my book editor. And they really helped me focus on making my writing as good as I could, especially focusing on those action words and writing sentences that were direct and to the point, and not necessarily long sentences with very complicated words. So it was a very interesting learning process for me, because I always like listening to writing. I like listening to storytelling, but I draw and paint way more frequently than I write. So I just had to practice a lot and kind of exercise that writing muscle and the writing part of my brain, so that I could make the story as good as it could be. Yeah.
It was perfect, I thought.
Thank you.
And if when I feel safe going into the school, I think, you know, I'm going to offer my help to the teachers. The librarian, she read the story to them and said they really loved it. And I'm surprised more kids didn't come to hear you, but I would like to go in. And, you know, there's so much to write about. And then once the kids start with their grandparents telling anecdotes and memories, there's so much material there. So I hope that can do that soon. Yeah.
Yeah. Hopefully a lot of
Maybe
families.
I'll go to your school. He's up in Albany at New Scotland.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. Yeah. So great.
Liz,
Great.
Liz, you did such a nice job. Do you teach at all? I thought you walked us through the steps so well, as if you have a lot of experience in explaining this process.
I don't teach officially, but I do a lot of workshops in classrooms where we'll either create a piece of artwork or learn about a different art process, or work on a writing project and illustrating project. But I've never been an actual teacher, no.
I like how you shared your high school painting with us. It was clear that you really liked art and you were very good at it at a young age. So that was really special that you shared that with us.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I had a couple of really great art teachers at Guilderland, especially Miss Ann Brown, really pushed me And she thought that I could study art in college and possibly find a job doing art after school. Yeah.
Neat. Where'd you go to college?
Rhode
Or-
Island School of Design
Wow,
in
nice.
Providence. Yeah. And then I got a Bachelor of Fine Arts degree. Yeah.
Neat. Well, thank you
That's
so much. It was
beautiful.
really good.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks for
Yeah,
joining.
that's wonderful. I grew up in Rhode Island, so
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
familiar with
Whereabouts?
Risty. In the South County, outside of Providence, down on the
Okay.
beaches.
Awesome. I was
Yeah.
just in Providence. Was that last week? Was it last week? Yes. I went back to RISD for a presentation in the class in which I created the original story for this. It was great to be back in Providence.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
That's really wonderful.
So you said the
Wow.
other night that you've got actually a deadline, I think. You're working with on another illustration with
Yep.
someone.
Yep. This is a book that was written by Nikki Grimes. She wrote Bedtime for Sweet Creatures, which I illustrated, and Off to See the Sea, which I illustrated.
Okay,
So this is a follow-up to those books.
right. Well, I'm going to make sure that we have them in our library
Yeah,
and in my library, and Hanukkah gifts and Christmas gifts. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And thanks a lot. Yeah.
yeah, thank you.
We loved it.
Yeah. Yeah, just loved it. And Liz, I think that it's wonderful that we can post the video. I think this will be inspiring to lots of children and people of all ages watching it. And it reminded me of the importance of saving certain kinds of things because you were able to go to the little, the thing you carried your pencils in, for goodness
Yeah.
sakes.
Yeah, exactly.
And the pictures of, the photographs of the men wearing beautiful,
Exactly.
beautiful fabric from Africa. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's been a
Thanks so much for
pleasure.
joining me.
Thank you, Liz.
All right.
Thank you.
Very nice. Very interesting.
Thanks.
Right.
And you liked it.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, Elizabeth.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, Jay.
Randy.
Bye.